You have ruined everything. Do you understand the shame you have brought upon us? I forbid you from ever leaving this room again.
The town of Ridgemont had a way of deciding who mattered and who didn't. It wasn't written anywhere. It didn't need to be. Everyone knew the rules. The pretty girls got picked first at dances. The thin ones got complimented at church. And the ones like Clara? They got whispered about. Clara Bennett had learned to make herself small, even though her body refused to cooperate. At 23, she lived in the cramped room above the general store where her mother worked. She helped stack shelves, sweep floors, and avoided mirrors. Mirrors told the truth, and the truth hurt. Her mother, Margaret, was a wiry woman with sharp eyes and sharper words. She'd been a beauty once, or so the faded photograph on the mantel claimed. Now she was bitter, worn down by widowhood and poverty. And she blamed Clara for most of it. "You eat too much," Margaret would say, not even looking up from her sewing. "No wonder we can't afford new fabric." Clara would set down her bread, appetite gone, shame hot in her chest. "No man's ever going to want you if you keep on like this." Clara stopped arguing years ago. What was the point? The mirror agreed with her mother. So did the boys in town who looked right through her. So did the girls who giggled when she walked past. So Clara learned to disappear. She kept her head down. She worked quietly. She avoided gatherings, avoided attention, avoided hope. But Ridgemont was a small town. And in small towns, you can't hide forever. It started with a notice in the general store. A grand gathering was being held at the Red Canyon Ranch, the largest spread in 3 counties. The owner, a man named Garrett Stone, was hosting a dinner for the local ranchers, their families, and the town's most prominent citizens. It was the social event of the season. Margaret's eyes lit up when she read it. Not because she was invited, she wasn't, but because she saw an opportunity. "They'll need serving girls," she said, tapping the notice with one bony finger. "Extra hands to carry food, pour drinks. I'll put your name forward." Clara's stomach sank. "Mama, no. Please. Don't you dare argue with me, girl. We need the money. And maybe if you're useful, someone will finally see you as more than a burden." Clara wanted to say that being useful wouldn't change how people saw her. That she'd still be the fat girl they mocked. That she'd rather scrub floors in silence than serve dinner to people who despised her. But her mother had already made up her mind. 2 days later, Clara stood in front of the cracked mirror in her room, trying to smooth down her plain brown dress. It was the nicest thing she owned, but it still pulled tight across her middle and sagged awkwardly at the shoulders. Her mousy brown hair refused to hold a curl. Her face, round and soft, stared back at her with tired blue eyes. She looked exactly like what she was, a girl no one wanted. The walk to Red Canyon Ranch took an hour. Clara went alone, carrying a small bundle with an apron and a pair of worn gloves. The road stretched long and dusty under the late afternoon sun. Wildflowers dotted the hills, and the sky was a brilliant, endless blue. It would have been beautiful if Clara's heart wasn't pounding with dread. The ranch appeared over a rise, sprawling, impressive, bordered by white fences and dotted with grazing cattle. The main house was 2 stories, painted white with dark shutters. A wide porch wrapped around the front, and lanterns were already being lit for the evening. Clara's hand started to shake. She approached the side entrance, where other serving girls were gathered. Most of them were younger, prettier. They wore fresh dresses and bright ribbons in their hair. When Clara appeared, the chatter stopped. Eyes flicked over her. A few girls exchanged glances. One smirked. "Well," said a blonde girl named Lacey, "looks like they'll let anyone work here." Laughter rippled through the group. Quiet, cruel laughter. Clara kept her eyes on the ground and moved past them into the house. Inside, the kitchen was chaos. Pots boiled on the stove, roasts turned on spits, and trays of bread cooled on every available surface. A stern older woman named Mrs. Calloway barked orders at the girls. "You," she said, pointing at Clara. You'll carry the platters to the dining hall. Keep your head down, don't speak unless spoken to, and for heaven's sake, don't drop anything. Clara nodded, throat tight. As the sun set, the guests began to arrive. Clara caught glimpses of them through the doorway, men in clean shirts and polished boots, women in fine dresses, children scrubbed and shy. They filled the dining hall with laughter and conversation, the warm glow of lantern light casting everything in gold. And then he arrived. Clara didn't see him at first. She was carrying a heavy tray of roasted vegetables, arms aching when the room seemed to shift. Conversations quieted. Heads turned. A man stood in the doorway. He was tall, taller than most men Clara had ever seen, with broad shoulders and a lean, muscular build. He wore a dark shirt, sleeves rolled to his elbows, and a black hat shadowed his face. But even in shadow, Clara could see the sharp line of his jaw, the pale eyes that swept the room with calm authority. This was Garrett Stone. The rancher. The man who owned everything around them. He moved into the room without hurry, without fanfare. But every eye followed him. Clara hurried back to the kitchen, heart hammering for reasons she didn't understand. "That's him," whispered one of the serving girls, peeking through the doorway. "Garrett Stone. They say he's the richest man in the territory." "And the loneliest." "Loneliest?" another girl asked. "He lost his wife years ago. Some say he's never gotten over it. Lives out here all alone, barely speaks to anyone." Clara didn't care about gossip. She just wanted to get through the night without humiliation. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. As the dinner progressed, Clara moved in and out of the dining hall, serving food, refilling glasses, trying to be invisible. Most of the guests ignored her. A few gave her disdainful looks. One man made a joke about sturdy girls that made the table laugh. Clara's face burned, but she said nothing. Then Mrs. Calloway pulled her aside. "Mr. Stone wants more bread brought to the head table." "You'll take it." Clara's breath caught. "Can't someone else?" "Now, girl." Hands shaking, Clara picked up the basket of bread and crossed the dining hall. Every step felt like walking through fire. She could feel eyes on her. Hear the whispers starting. The head table sat on a raised platform. Garrett Stone was at the center, flanked by other prominent ranchers. Clara climbed the steps carefully, praying she wouldn't trip. She set the basket down as quickly as she could, keeping her eyes lowered. "Thank you," a deep voice said. Clara froze. Slowly, she looked up. Garrett Stone was watching her. His pale eyes, gray, she realized, like winter sky, were steady, unreadable. "You're welcome, sir," she whispered, and turned to leave. But as she did, her foot caught the edge of the platform. She stumbled, barely catching herself. The room erupted in laughter. "Careful, girl," someone shouted. "You'll bring the whole table down." More laughter. Cruel, delighted laughter. Clara's vision blurred with tears. She wanted to run. To disappear. To wake up and find this was all a nightmare. But then Garrett Stone stood. The laughter died. He stepped around the table, boots heavy on the wooden floor, and walked straight to Clara. The room held its breath. Clara stood frozen, waiting for him to yell at her. To dismiss her. To add his voice to the mockery. Instead, he did something no one expected. He pulled out the chair beside his own. "Sit," he said quietly. Clara stared at him, uncomprehending. "So? Sit beside me?" The room exploded into whispers. Shocked faces turned toward them. Clara felt dizzy, confused, terrified. I can't. I'm supposed to serve." "You're supposed to be treated like a person," Garrett said, his voice calm but firm. "Now sit." Clara's legs nearly gave out. Trembling, she lowered herself into the chair. It felt wrong. Surreal. Like stepping into someone else's life. Garrett returned to his seat and calmly resumed eating, as if nothing unusual had happened. But everything had changed. Around the room, guests exchanged bewildered looks. The laughter had stopped. The mockery had stopped. And Clara, the girl who'd spent her whole life being invisible, was now sitting at the head table beside the most powerful man in the territory. Her heart pounded so hard she thought it might burst. Garrett turned to her, his expression unreadable. "What's your name?" "Clara," she whispered. "Clara Bennett." He nodded once. "Clara, would you like some dinner?" She couldn't find her voice. She could only nod. Garrett gestured to one of the other serving girls, who hurried over with a plate. Food was set before Clara: roast beef, potatoes, vegetables, fresh bread. More food than she'd seen in weeks. She stared at it, overwhelmed. "Go on," Garrett said gently. "Eat." Clara picked up her fork with shaking hands. The room was still watching. Still whispering. But Garrett's presence beside her felt like a shield. She took a bite. The food was warm, rich, delicious. Tears pricked her eyes, but she blinked them back. Garrett didn't speak much. He ate quietly, occasionally nodding at something one of the other ranchers said. But every so often, he glanced at Clara, checking on her. And slowly, impossibly, Clara began to breathe. The dinner continued. Conversations resumed, though the energy in the room had shifted. People kept glancing at the head table, at Clara, trying to make sense of what they'd witnessed. Clara didn't understand it either. She didn't know why this man, this powerful, lonely rancher, had chosen to defend her. To honor her. To pull out a chair and say, "Sit beside me." But as the evening wore on, something inside her began to change. For the first time in her life, Clara didn't feel invisible. She felt seen. The dinner stretched late into the night. Plates were cleared, desserts were served, and the conversations around the room grew louder, fueled by wine and whiskey. But Clara barely heard any of it. She sat frozen in her chair beside Garrett Stone, feeling like she'd been transported into a dream or a nightmare. She wasn't sure which. People were still staring. She could feel their eyes, sharp and curious, burning into her. Whispers floated through the air like smoke. She caught fragments of them. Sitting with him. What's he thinking? Of all people. Clara's hands were clenched in her lap, her knuckles white. She wanted to disappear. To melt into the chair and never be seen again. But Garrett's calm presence beside her kept her anchored. He didn't seem bothered by the attention. He ate his dessert, a slice of apple pie, with the same quiet focus he'd given everything else. When he finished, he set down his fork and turned to her. "How long have you lived in Ridgemont?" he asked. His voice was low, meant only for her. It startled her. She glanced up, meeting those pale grey eyes. "All my life, sir," she said softly. "You work at the general store?" She nodded. "Yes. With my mother." He was quiet for a moment, studying her. Clara felt her cheeks heat under his gaze. She looked down at her hands. "You don't talk much," he observed. She swallowed. "I'm not used to people wanting to hear what I have to say." Something flickered in his eyes. It might have been sadness. Or recognition. "That's a shame," he said simply. Clara didn't know how to respond. So she said nothing. Garrett leaned back in his chair, his gaze drifting over the crowded room. "Most people talk too much. Say a lot of words that don't mean anything. I've always thought silence was underrated." Clara blinked. She hadn't expected that. But, he continued, silence shouldn't come from fear. Or from being told you don't matter. Her breath caught. How did he know? How could he possibly know? Before she could answer, one of the ranchers at the table, a thick-necked man named Howard Briggs, leaned forward with a smirk. "So, Garrett," he said loudly, drawing the attention of the nearby guests. You gonna tell us what this is all about? You pulling some kind of charity stunt? The room quieted. All eyes turned to the head table. Clara's stomach dropped. She wanted to sink through the floor. But Garrett didn't flinch. He turned his steady gaze on Howard, his expression unreadable. I don't recall asking for your opinion, Howard. The words were quiet. But they carried weight. Howard's smirk faltered. I'm just saying, Howard pressed, though his voice had lost some of its bravado. Folks are wondering why you'd. Folks should mind their own business. The silence that followed was heavy. Howard shifted in his seat, his face reddening. No one else dared to speak. Garrett stood, pushing his chair back. The scrape of wood against wood echoed in the quiet room. Thank you all for coming, he said, addressing the crowd. His voice was calm, authoritative. I hope you enjoyed the meal. You're welcome to stay for drinks, but I'll be retiring for the evening. He glanced down at Clara. Miss Bennett, would you walk with me? Clara's heart nearly stopped. Walk with him? Alone? Every instinct screamed at her to refuse. To run. To hide. But something in his eyes, something steady and unafraid, made her nod. Yes, sir. She stood on shaking legs. Garrett offered her his arm. She stared at it for a moment, uncomprehending. Then, slowly, she slipped her hand through the crook of his elbow. The room erupted into whispers the moment they stepped away from the table. Garrett led her out of the dining hall, through the wide double doors, and onto the front porch. The night air was cool and sweet, filled with the scent of sagebrush and distant rain. Stars scattered across the sky like diamonds. Clara breathed in deeply, trying to steady herself. Her hand was still resting on Garrett's arm, and she was acutely aware of the warmth of him, the solid strength beneath the fabric of his shirt. They walked in silence to the edge of the porch. Garrett stopped, resting one hand on the railing, and looked out over the darkened land. I'm sorry if I put you in an uncomfortable position, he said quietly. Clara blinked. You're apologizing to me. You didn't ask to be the center of attention. I imagine it wasn't easy. No, she admitted. But why did you do it? He was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was distant, thoughtful. I saw the way they looked at you. The way they laughed. I've seen it before. Done to others. Done to me. He paused. I didn't like it. Clara stared at him. People laugh at you. A faint smile touched his lips, but it didn't reach his eyes. Not to my face. Not anymore. But when I was younger, yes. I was the strange kid. The quiet one. The one who didn't fit in. He glanced at her. People like to pick on those who don't fit their mold. Clara felt something crack open inside her chest. She'd never imagined someone like Garrett Stone, powerful, respected, untouchable, had ever been mocked. Ever been made to feel small. I didn't know, she whispered. Most people don't. He turned to face her fully. But I remember. And I decided a long time ago that if I ever had the power to stop it, I would. Tears welled in Clara's eyes. She tried to blink them back, but one escaped, sliding down her cheek. Garrett's expression softened. I didn't mean to make you cry. You didn't, she said quickly, wiping at her face. It's just, no one's ever stood up for me before. Not like that. He nodded slowly. Then people have failed you. They stood in silence for a while, the night settling around them. Clara's heart was still racing, but the fear had faded. In its place was something fragile and unfamiliar. Hope. What will you do now? Garrett asked. Go back to the store. Clara nodded. I don't have anywhere else to go. He was quiet, considering. Then he said, what if you did? She looked at him, confused. So? I'm in need of a housekeeper. Someone to help manage the house, prepare meals. The work isn't easy, but it pays well. And you'd have your own room. Your own space. Clara's breath caught. You're offering me a job? If you want it. Her mind raced. Leave her mother's house? Leave the store? It sounded like a fantasy. But fantasies didn't come true for girls like her. Why? She asked. Why me? Garrett met her eyes. Because I think you deserve better than what you've been given. And because I could use someone around here who understands what it's like to be underestimated. Clara didn't know what to say. The offer was overwhelming. Terrifying. And impossibly kind. I'll need to think about it, she said. Take your time. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. If you decide you want the job, bring this to the ranch. Anytime. She took the paper with trembling hands. It was a simple note, written in strong, clear handwriting. Clara Bennett is employed at Red Canyon Ranch as of her acceptance. Garrett Stone. Thank you, she whispered. He nodded once. Come on. I'll have one of the hands take you back to town. Clara wanted to protest, to say she could walk, but she was too exhausted. Too overwhelmed. So she simply followed him. A young ranch hand brought a wagon around, and Garrett helped Clara into the seat. His hand was steady, respectful. When she was settled, he stepped back. Good night, Miss Bennett. Good night, Mr. Stone. The wagon rolled forward, carrying Clara away from the ranch and back toward town. She clutched the note in her hands, staring down at the words. Her heart was pounding. Her mind was spinning. Everything had changed. When Clara returned home, the house was dark. Her mother was asleep, or pretending to be. Clara crept into her small room, lit a candle, and sat on the edge of her narrow bed. She unfolded the note and read it again. Clara Bennett is employed at Red Canyon Ranch as of her acceptance. She could leave. She could start over. She could escape the whispers, the mockery, the constant weight of her mother's disappointment. But fear gnawed at her. What if it was a trick? What if Garrett changed his mind? What if she failed? Clara set the note on her bedside table and blew out the candle. She lay in the darkness, staring at the ceiling, her mind a storm of doubt and hope. Sleep didn't come easily. But when it did, she dreamed of wide-open spaces, of a porch under the stars, and of a man with quiet gray eyes who'd said, "Sit beside me." The next morning, Clara woke to her mother's sharp voice. "You're a fool if you think he meant any of it," Margaret said, standing in the doorway with her arms crossed. Clara sat up, disoriented. "What?" "Don't play dumb. The whole town's talking. You made a spectacle of yourself." Clara's chest tightened. "I didn't do anything. You sat at his table like you belonged there. Like you were somebody." Margaret's voice was cold. "But you're not, Clara. You're just a fat girl who got lucky for one night. Don't let it go to your head." The word stung, sharp and familiar. But this time, something was different. Clara thought of Garrett's voice. "People have failed you." She stood, her hand shaking but her voice steady. "Maybe I am somebody," she said quietly. "Maybe I've always been. And maybe you just never wanted to see it." Margaret's eyes widened in shock. "How dare you?" But Clara was already moving. She grabbed her small bag, stuffed a few belongings inside, and picked up the note from the bedside table. "Where do you think you're going?" Margaret demanded. Clara turned to face her mother. For the first time in her life, she didn't look away. "I'm going to the ranch. I'm going to accept Mr. Stone's offer. And I'm going to start over." "You'll regret this," Margaret spat. "You'll come crawling back, and I won't take you in." Clara took a breath. "Maybe. But at least I'll have tried." And with that, she walked out the door. The walk to Red Canyon Ranch felt longer in the daylight. The sun beat down on Clara's shoulders and dust clung to the hem of her dress. She carried her small bag in one hand and the note in the other, folded carefully, like a talisman. Her heart hammered with every step. Doubt whispered in her ear. What if he didn't mean it? What if it was just pity? What if you're making a mistake? But Clara kept walking. When the ranch came into view, she stopped for a moment, taking it in. In the morning light, it looked even more impressive, white fences gleaming, cattle grazing peacefully, the big house standing proud against the endless sky. She forced her feet to move. As she approached the main house, a ranch hand spotted her. He was an older man with a weathered face and kind eyes. "You lost, miss?" he asked. Clara swallowed. "I'm here to see Mr. Stone. He offered me a job." The man's eyebrows rose. "You're Clara Bennett." She nodded, surprised. "You know my name. Boss mentioned you might be coming." He smiled. "Come on. I'll take you to him." Clara followed the man around the side of the house to a large barn. Inside, Garrett was working with a horse, a beautiful chestnut mare. He was speaking to her in low, soothing tones, running a brush along her flank. The ranch hand cleared his throat. "Boss. Miss Bennett's here." Garrett looked up. When his eyes landed on Clara, something shifted in his expression. Surprise. And maybe, just maybe, relief. "Clara," he said, setting down the brush. He walked toward her, wiping his hands on his jeans. "You came." "I did," she said, her voice trembling. She held out the note. I'd like to accept. If the offer's still open." Garrett took the note, glanced at it, then looked back at her. "It is. It absolutely is." Clara's knees went weak with relief. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. It's hard work." But he was smiling, a small, genuine smile that softened his entire face. "Come on. I'll show you the house." The house was bigger than Clara had imagined. The rooms were spacious and clean, filled with simple, sturdy furniture. Garrett led her upstairs to a small bedroom at the end of the hall. "This will be yours," he said, pushing open the door. Clara stepped inside. The room had a bed with a patchwork quilt, a dresser, a small table, and a window that looked out over the hills. It was modest. But to Clara, it felt like a palace. "It's perfect," she whispered. Garrett nodded. "Good. You can settle in today. Tomorrow, I'll show you the routines. Cooking, cleaning, that sort of thing. If you need help, the hands are around, and Mrs. Calloway comes by once a week." Clara turned to face him. "Mr. Stone, why are you doing this?" He leaned against the door frame, his expression thoughtful. "I told you last night. You deserve better. And I meant it. But you don't even know me." "I know enough." He paused. "And maybe I'm doing this for selfish reasons too." Clara frowned. "Selfish. It gets lonely out here," he admitted. "Having someone around, someone who understands what it's like to be on the outside, maybe that's good for both of us." Clara's heart ached at the honesty in his voice. She nodded. "Maybe it is." The first few days were hard. Clara wasn't used to the work, hauling water, scrubbing floors, preparing meals for a household. Her body ached. Her hands blistered. But Garrett was patient. He never raised his voice. Never criticized. And when she burned the bread on the second day, he simply smiled and said, "We'll eat it anyway." Slowly, Clara found her rhythm. She woke early, made coffee, prepared breakfast. She cleaned the rooms, mended clothes, tended the small garden. And in the evenings, she and Garrett would sit on the porch, watching the sun set over the hills. They didn't talk much at first. But the silence between them was comfortable. Safe. One evening, about a week after Clara had arrived, Garrett spoke. "You're doing well," he said. Clara looked over at him, surprised. "You think so?" "I know so. The house feels alive again." She smiled. "It's a good house." "It was my wife's," he said quietly. "She loved this place. Spent hours fixing it up, making it a home." He paused. "When she died, it felt empty. Like all the life went out of it." Clara's heart clenched. "I'm sorry. It was a long time ago." He looked at her. "But having you here, it helps." Clara didn't know what to say. So she just reached over and squeezed his hand. He squeezed back. As the weeks passed, something shifted between them. It was subtle at first, small gestures, lingering glances, moments of shared laughter. Garrett started talking more, telling Clara about the ranch, about his life. And Clara, slowly, began to open up too. She told him about her mother. About the years of shame and silence. About the mirror she'd avoided and the dreams she'd buried. Garrett listened. He didn't judge. He didn't pity. He just listened. "You're stronger than you think," he said one night. Clara shook her head. "I don't feel strong. Strength isn't about feeling it. It's about doing it anyway." He met her eyes. "You left? You chose yourself. That's strength." Tears filled Clara's eyes. "Thank you." "For what?" "For seeing me." Garrett's expression softened. "You're easy to see, Clara. The world just wasn't looking." One afternoon, Clara was in town picking up supplies when she ran into Lacey, the blonde girl who'd mocked her at the ranch. Lacey's eyes widened when she saw Clara. Well. Look who it is." Clara braced herself. "I heard you're working for Garrett Stone now," Lacey said, her tone dripping with false sweetness. "Must be nice. Living in that big house. Pretending you're something you're not." Clara felt the old shame rising. But then she remembered Garrett's words. "You're stronger than you think." She lifted her chin. "I'm not pretending anything. I'm working. And I'm happy." Lacey's smile faltered. "Happy? You really think he cares about you?" "He's just using you." "Maybe," Clara said calmly. "Or maybe he's the first person who's ever treated me with respect. Either way, it's better than anything I had before." Lacey stared at her, speechless. Clara picked up her supplies and walked away, head held high. When Clara returned to the ranch, she found Garrett in the barn, fixing a saddle. He looked up when she came in. "How was town?" he asked. "Fine," she said. Then, after a pause, "I ran into Lacey." Garrett's jaw tightened. "Did she give you trouble?" "She tried." Clara smiled. "But I didn't let her." Garrett set down the saddle and walked over to her. "Good," he said softly. "You're learning." Clara looked up at him. He was so close. She could see the flecks of blue in his gray eyes, the faint lines at the corners. "Garrett," she said quietly. "Why did you really choose me?" That night at the dinner. He was silent for a moment. Then he reached up and gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "Because when I looked at you," he said, "I saw someone who'd been hurt. Someone who'd been told they didn't matter. And I couldn't let that stand." Clara's breath hitched. "And now?" "Now." He smiled. "Now I see someone brave. Someone kind. Someone who makes this house feel like home again." Tears spilled down Clara's cheeks. Garrett wiped them away with his thumb. "Clara," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I know this started as a job. But it's become more than that. For me, at least." Clara's heart pounded. "For me too." He leaned down slowly, giving her time to pull away. But she didn't. She rose on her toes and met him halfway. The kiss was soft. gentle. And it felt like coming home. Months passed. The town eventually stopped talking. Clara and Garrett became a familiar sight, working side by side, walking together, building a life. Clara grew stronger. Not just in body, but in spirit. She laughed more. Spoke up more. And when she looked in the mirror now, she didn't see shame. She saw a woman who'd survived. A woman who'd chosen herself. A woman who was loved. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the stars, Garrett turned to her. "Marry me," he said. Clara blinked. "What?" "Marry me," he repeated, taking her hand. "I don't have a fancy ring. And I'm not good with words. But I love you, Clara. And I want to spend the rest of my life with you." Clara's eyes filled with tears. But this time, they were tears of joy. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes." Garrett pulled her into his arms, and Clara felt something she'd never felt before. Peace. She was no longer the girl the town mocked. She was no longer invisible. She was Clara Stone. And she was home.